and welcome to another episode of the LEI'D Back Life podcast, where we are talking about loving entrepreneurship and improving daily. Last week had a really cool episode, involved a lot more about baseball cards than you would expect on a life-focused podcast. But really, we did it with Ryan McKean. For those who don't know, Ryan, great guy, runs Best Era Coaching, had a $100 million verdict, talked about finding your passion outside of work. And so really like incorporating your full self into what you do, finding the things that you love that are outside of work. And in keeping with that run, now I'm here with Chris. For those of you that don't know Chris, we do both normally wear Hawaiian shirts. If you're on the podcast, you're missing out because we both have cool shirts on. Chris wants to empower business owners to achieve an abundance of time, money, and energy so they can do what they love. He's an entrepreneur just like you, started his own firm right out of school, and not surprisingly, did horrible the first year, which I'm going to give him and any of you a ton of credit for, because I did it too. We go to law school, they don't teach us how to run a business, they barely teach us how to be lawyers, because law school doesn't prepare us for running a business. So Chris realized he needed not only be a good lawyer, but a good business owner, started studying everything he could, and just a few short years later, his business was doing really well. Got to the point where he was working only a few hours a week in his firm and playing way too many video games, which did not bring him the happiness he was looking for. So when the pandemic hit, he decided it was time to help others, created the Time Freedom Lawyers, where he empowers attorneys to create a law firm that they love and that gives them the life they desire. And I don't know if I could write a bio more apt to a guest of this show. So welcome, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. We have almost coast to coast Hawaiian shirts, life-focused lawyers, helping other lawyers live lives. So what better place to do it than at the LEI'D Back Life podcast? Here we are.
Yeah. Awesome.
Go a little bit deeper with me on this story, right? Like, I mean, it's familiar to me. You and I had very similar beginnings, but like hit I'm going to say highlights, but maybe it's lowlights of the beginning.
Yeah, a little bit of both. So, yeah, I went to law school in San Antonio, was on the negotiation team there, whatever, all the journal, all those kind of things that you think are important when you're in law school. Started looking around, looking at jobs, and I had an interview with a big law firm where they offered me a high six-figure salary. And then they told me, kiss your family goodbye for the next 3 years. Like you're going to work 60 to 80 hours a week, at least. Maybe you'll get some time off for Christmas. Maybe you won't, but pay your dues, and then you can make even more money and work just as many hours later, is pretty much was their pitch.
But
and
at least they were honest.
They were honest. And I will give them credit for that. They were honest on the commitments there. I had a baby that was like less than a year old. And I was like, no, I'm not missing the first 3 years of my boy's life. So I turned that down, one of the first people to do that ever with their company, and moved back to Utah, studied and took the bar here. And then as I was looking for jobs, no one offered anything like more than like $50,000 a year. It was just pennies. And I'm like, man, for that, in comparison to what I had at this other place, I just can't reasonably do that. For that price, I can start my own firm. So I started my own firm. I think I made like $78,000 the first year and kept 14 of it. So I would have made more money working for someone else. Barely made above minimum wage. And I was like, okay, that's not acceptable either. I may be a good lawyer, but I don't know anything about this business stuff. So I cracked down on the business. And like I said, a couple of years later, I was doing pretty well, but it's always been that balance of time, money, and energy for me. Like, yes, I want to make more money, but not at the expense of being able to do things with my family and those types of stuff. And so even now, there's plenty of people who make way more money than I do, but it's the right balance that I need for me.
Yeah. Well, and those around you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the part I don't understand. So I'm gonna throw a lifeline to any of our listeners sitting there of the, like, I am struggling with my business. How many people, so according to Clio Trends, what are we, 65,000 for the average solo attorney, and 60, 70, 80 hours a week, right? So it's like, if you're going to work that many hours, you might as well take the higher paying job. So like the risk of failing, the risk of closing down your firm to find another job is the risk of making 3 times as much money to work fewer hours, to at least have the honesty that you will work crazy hours, instead of that weird business owner thing. And so like I love this concept of really figuring out the time, money, energy that's right for you, because I think for a lot of people it's having their own firm. For some it's not, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I just think
Yeah.
we get wrapped up in this more and more and more until we hate our current situation.
Yeah, and there's always something else to buy or something else to do. Like your money can always be spent. And I sometimes I feel like I almost have to like I justify the amount of time I'm away from my family by having the nice things instead of turning around and saying like, what do I actually want? And that was a big thing for me. Tim Ferriss in his book, The 4 Hour Work Week. Wow, that truck was really loud. Sorry. Tim
That's
Ferriss
okay.
in the 4 Hour Work Week, he talked about dreamlining, where he's like, identify all the things you want and then figure out how much they cost. And even like Ferraris and stuff were not astronomically priced once you really got down to it. And I kind of like to do the same thing for myself and the people around me, where we sit down, we figure out what they want. And then once they put a sticker to it, they're like, oh, I don't have to make 500,000 a year to go to Disneyland a couple times. Like, don't get me wrong, Disneyland's nice and pricey, and I've gone more times than I should, considering I don't live near Disneyland or Disney World. But when you really sit down and figure these things out, if you cut out all the other things that aren't bringing you as much happiness, you don't need to make nearly as much money to do the things that you really like.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I'm in Orlando,
I
so
know.
the other SeaWorld from San Antonio, but also the other Disney.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it's wild to me. And what do you see? I want to look at this question in two different ways. So let's start here.
Yeah.
What do you see the most as the things that people waste the most money on?
Things they waste the most money on. Um, Interest. That's always my answer. Buying things before they can afford it ends up making
Ah,
it cost just so much more.
that
You know,
interest.
like I bought a new car recently and I love it and I'm glad I did. Um, but I also bought it 18 months after I first decided I was going to buy it, because I started running the numbers. I'm like, man, I don't want to pay $80,000 for a new car. The car I bought was a Mustang Mach-E, 50 grand,
There
right?
we go.
And I'm not saying it to drop the number. What I'm trying to say here is I looked at it. I was like, if I make the minimum payment on this $50,000 car is now $80,000. If I wait a year and a half until I have the money for it, now it's 50,000 and I save 30 grand, right? And once I look at that, I'm like, that's a month of my life. Like I saved a month of my life by just not buying it before I was ready. And so, I mean, there's things that you have to buy, obviously, and you can pay interest on those things, but more often than not, just deferring what you want until you actually can pay for it makes things way cheaper.
Well, and I listen, I love that whole story. I especially love that's 1 month of my life.
Yeah.
Like that money is, especially the more that we go into digital, right? Like money is
Mhm.
this weird thing that sort of exists, but most of the time doesn't exist, short of tapping your phone to a register or looking at
Yeah.
a bank account, right? So you have put a specific moment on, that 30 grand being a month of my life, which I think makes it so much easier to make the decision to wait or to not wait, but knowing
Yeah.
like that's the trade-off.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I, you always hear me say time, money, and energy, right? And so I'm always looking to see like, okay, I believe anyone can really achieve almost any goal if they're willing to put their mind to it. Like I may never be a 7 foot center in the NBA, but I probably could have played in the NBA if I'd worked out 8 hours a day like Kobe Bryant did. I would never would have been as good as him. But like there's obviously limitations on things, but for the most part, like we can achieve almost any goal. But you always have to look at what the cost is. Like I probably would have had to practice like 12 hours a day to ride the bench in the NBA, and it's not worth the cost to me. Um, but I want people to realize that, like when you're working, what are you giving up? Like when you're not working, what are you giving up? Like as long as you understand those and you prioritize the things that are most important to you, that's where I find the most happiness.
I love it. That being said, how do you figure out, or how do you help other people figure out what does matter to them?
Yeah. um,
I know you're laughing because we get asked this question all the time. Like this is the
right.
question.
And
Like
and
like
it's
how do you know you're in love? And it's just like, anyway.
it's really funny too, because, when I first started coaching a couple of years ago, it was like, okay, you decide what you want, then you make a plan to achieve it, and then you execute the plan. I was like, this is really easy, right? And then as I started doing this, I would help people like set their goals. And then within about 4 to 5 weeks, over 75% of the people I worked with changed their goal. Because we're so ingrained to think we want certain things. Like, I need $1 million a year business, or I need a Maserati, or whatever it is. You don't actually want that. You've just been ingrained and told that's what you should want. So what I like to do is we identify clearly what the thing they think they want is, but then we clearly track the actions that they're taking. And if they're not taking the actions that are necessary to achieve that, then I like to ask them why. Maybe they don't understand and they need to fix it, but more often than not, they'll say, you know what? I didn't do that thing because I was doing this other thing and I wanted that more. So by being really intentional and tracking the actions that we're taking, it helps them identify what they actually want in life. Then usually when we change their goals, things flow a lot smoother after those first 4 weeks.
But I think that's the key though, right? Like they need to pick the wrong scorecard to
Yes.
realize the right scorecard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Especially in today's society, I think we really have been ingrained so much that you almost have to like put it on paper and realize, like truly identify what it is we're talking about to be able to say, you know what, that's not what I want in life. Yeah, you're
So
dead on there.
I am reading I'm reading what I would call so far the best book I've ever read that is the worst organized book I've ever read. So
Okay.
this is sort of a weird compliment to this book. It's How to Think
Yeah.
Like a Roman Emperor. I
Yeah.
don't know if you're familiar with the book.
No,
So
I'm not.
basically, it's Marcus Aurelius and cognitive behavioral therapy rolled into one, but
Okay.
there's no organization. It does not track his life chronologically. It does not have 10 steps. It's just like, this is a cool thing that I found, and this is how it applies. And so, like I say, it is such a cool book, but it
Yeah.
makes no sense to me how it was organized. That being said, one of his biggest things he keeps coming back to is Marcus Aurelius' thing about know thyself, and translated from ancient
Yeah.
Roman, but regardless. So like it is funny to me how much easier it should be for us to know ourselves based upon technology, the advances, how much longer we live, etc. And yet I feel like we know ourselves less because there's so many shiny objects like your video games, social media, your cell
Yeah.
phone, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I 100% agree. So many distractions. It really does make it really hard unless you're super intentional about it.
But so before we started on this, we kept talking, I think we kept coming back to basically the concept of boundaries.
Yeah.
I blanked on, you added in Parkinson's law.
Yeah.
It's almost like we need to set a boundary to give us the time to figure out what we truly want.
Yeah. 100%. That's really, I mean, if I were to boil down like my, you know, large coaching program, all I really end up doing with people is we identify what they think they want, but then we actually go into their calendar and we say, okay, like lawyers, they bill a couple $100 an hour, right? So if they want to make $10,000 in a week, we figure out how many hours do you need to work. And I go and I put that on their calendar so they can see like large portion of their calendar is gone. And then we put in things like working out and doing stuff with their family and friends. Like I don't just plan out from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We plan out their entire day, like from when they're going to wake up to when to not. And that really helps them then see, like someone calls them and says, hey, do you want to go to the movies tonight? They pull up their calendar and they see what's on their calendar and they have to decide, do I want to give up eating dinner with my wife to go to the movies tonight? Maybe the answer is yes, maybe it's no. I guess it probably depends on the movie, right?
Gladiator 2.
Yeah,
Haven't
Gladiator
seen it,
2, I'm going to
but
say yes, right? I went and saw the Dune movie at like midnight and I pulled it up and knew that that's when I should be sleeping and I will be tired the next day, and it was still worth it, all 3 hours of it. But I like to do it that way so that when people are presented with opportunities, they pull their calendar up and they start looking and seeing like, okay, what am I trading for this? Because you're doing something at all moments of the day. If you're trading like looking at YouTube or watching, whatever, then sure, let's take that fun activity. But if it's something important, then maybe it's not. But I like to do it that way. I truly just control people's calendars, have them control their calendars, and then we kind of track and see not only what they planned on doing, but what actions they actually took, and using that as the foundation.
So, and then I'll go a step further because I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And all those things that are recurring, you put on your calendar as recurring tasks. So like flat
Yes.
out, I have had opportunities 14 months ahead that I was like, that's a bad week for me. And they were just like, what? And I was like,
Yeah.
it's a coaching week. So you got anything, 1 week before, 1 week previous? They were like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, all right, we can just swap the guest speaker for this program. And I was like, thank you. And it was just I totally understood how shocked they were that I could tell them 14 months out that was not a good week for me. Um, but I did, and it was okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I did the exact same thing just last week. Someone asked me for something and it was in 2026. And I looked, I was like, no, I'm not going to be available then. They're like, what do you mean? Like, who has their calendar booked out 2 years in advance? I'm like, well, it's not like I've actually planned it. Those are reoccurring events. And so
Yeah,
until I change it, that's how it's going to be. And I can't do it then. So that's awesome that you did the same thing.
I love it. So, okay, and do me a favor. I mentioned Parkinson's law. You mentioned it first. Can you give us the rundown of Parkinson's law?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, long story short, it's just things will take as long as you let them take.
The way that I explained it to my 6-year-old was a fart smells worse in a smaller room. So
Yeah.
that was our external boundary was the walls.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so what what do you have people set boundaries for or set boundaries from, or like what's the mindset of setting a boundary?
Yeah. I like to test and see how long things actually take me to do.
Okay.
And like a lot of my law firms that I work with, we transition to flat fees. And so at that point, we're just trying to be efficient. Where other attorneys who are billing by the hour, they may want to be inefficient on things. I can't stand that idea. So um what I'll usually do is if I think like a motion's going to take me an hour and a half, then I'll put on my calendar that I have an hour to do it. And I'll sit down and I'll work on it for an hour and see if I can get it done in an hour. And I'm testing two things. One, can I get it done? Two is what do I cut out in order to make that work? And so, there's some extra research I could have done, but I didn't. And I like to really pay attention to the things that I'm cutting out, eliminating from the process. And if it's nothing of extreme value, then I from then on out, I do those motions at an hour or even less. And I keep pushing that boundary until the things that I have to cut out do add enough value that it's worth adding them back in. So
How do
with
you
the
know that?
how do I know that?
Yeah.
I mean, with legal documents, it's pretty easy. I feel like I can see at the end of the day. Um, but obviously it's going to depend on the item and the task, like working out, for instance. Um, if you work out for 10 minutes, you're probably not going to get a great burn. So some of it is just intrinsic feelings, other things you can track. And so it's a really good question. I don't have a specific answer for, but
Yeah. Well,
kind of
and I
just
don't
depends on the process.
and like I will I'm gonna give a shout out to Elon Musk and I'm gonna get
Yeah.
ridiculed for it. Listen, I think he's a crazy psychopath. However, I like the concept that he talks about, like when he went down with his businesses, cut out so many things that we have to put 10% of them back.
Yeah.
Probably not great when your Cybertruck has 7 recalls in the first several months from needing things put back in.
Yeah.
But I like that he has a framework of, cutting back until we know we're going to have to add back in.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't like, I asked you that question because I don't know the answer. Like it is tough
Right.
to know the immediate return on some of our stuff.
Yeah. And I do kind of base it like with motions, for instance. We have done this a lot with my team, and um our process is now very streamlined where my assistant takes the information. She's the one that puts it in the document. She sends it to the client to get an initial look at it. Then the attorney looks at it. And usually the attorney's looking at it like 30 to 60 minutes before they're meeting with the client. And so I've done that to constrain how much time the attorney has to spend on it. And I've come up with that solution because that seems to be like usually the attorney's about done with it when the call's scheduled. And it seems to be right. And then on the back end, we've done reviews to see like, okay, what was the work product? Like, did it work? Did it not? I noticed like typos. That's the first symptom that we took too long on something, is there's a bunch of typos. So we have kind of done some checks and balances there. And it really depends on the importance of something like emotion or someone's child is at issue. Like we're going to spend a couple extra reviews on that to make sure it's right than just what I eat for lunch that day or something. So it kind of doesn't depend on the importance, but I do like to kind of test it on the back end, see like, are there errors? Did it work? That kind of stuff.
But I also think like it's interesting because people can listen to that and say like, okay, well, we'll just cut back until there's typos. And I'm like, no, the point is if the more streamlined you have stuff, the more you can accommodate somebody who is sick or has a kid who's sick, or
Yes.
if you are cramming 60 hours of work into 40 hours every single week, you don't have any buffer for things to go wrong. If
Yeah.
you are taking 40 hours to do what could be done in 30 hours, you have a 10-hour buffer for the
Yes.
S to hit the fan.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that because I was talking to my kids about that just yesterday. We were rushing to church, and we all slept in and stuff. We stayed at our cousin's house for extra long, so we were all super tired. So we didn't wake up on time. We rushed to church, and we get to church, and the toy that I had brought to keep my 3-year-old distracted, I left on the table. And well, it was like a little bench. So I unplugged my car, hung the cord up, and I didn't grab it back off the table. And I was like, this is what happens. Like when you're rushing, inevitably you miss things. And if you create yourself enough buffers, then this doesn't happen. Now, luckily, I only live like 3 minutes from the church, so I went and got it. But
There you
it
go.
was worth it to have the child distracted
Yeah, well, but
for
you made
55
that
minutes. But
decision. Yeah.
um, but yeah, by building in these things, that's what kind of gives you the assurity that, I mean, I feel like it gives you better quality work because you have those buffers in there.
Well, and the biggest thing for me that I've added, because like, so I'm in Florida. I don't think believed in COVID, or maybe we did for some period of time. But
Yeah.
like now that I think we are back to normal or whatever that will be, there are some things that are virtual and some things that are not. And so I'm like, hey, in my SOPs, you have to book me travel time. If it is in person, you have to book me travel time. I cannot teleport to lunch. I cannot, I don't
Yeah.
go to court, but like whatever else it is. And so I know that if I'm running late and stressed, I'm driving like a bat out of hell. So I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, punch it into Google Maps right now. If it says it's 12 minutes, give me 15. If it says it's 20 minutes, give me 30. Like we have this whole thing so that I will ping like, hey, Jordan, you need to leave right now for this event so you're not rushing there. And
Yeah.
then, we can backfill the rest of the stuff. But yeah, it's like just having those extra 5 minutes, sitting at lunch, waiting for somebody else to come and reading a book or doing something on my phone is so much nicer than scrambling for those 5 minutes to not be late, to force yourself there, to forget the toy, to, whatever else.
Yeah. And that's where, I mean, one of your original questions was like, what boundaries do you put in place? One of the boundaries I like to remove is that you work from 8 to 5. I don't actually care when you work, and I definitely don't think you have to work 40 hours. So what I like to do when I'm planning out someone's week is we put all of the important stuff in first, like taking care of themselves physically, mental and emotional health, activities with their friends and family. We put all of that stuff in first, and then we say, okay, now when are we going to do those income producing activities? When do those fit around these things that are so important? And you still got to get them done, and we've still got to kind of watch your energy level. Like I don't want you doing complex analysis at 11 o'clock at night unless you're a night owl. But I always put those important things in first and let the money activities be built around them. And sometimes I work at 6 in the morning and then I'm off work at 2 because my kids are off school or something. Like I found that to be a lot more productive than just saying, okay, works from 8 to 5. I'm going to try to squeeze all the important things in around that.
All right, I want to dive into that. But before that, I'm going to talk about the newsletter for this week.
Okay.
So this week, Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern time, if you're signed up for my free newsletter, you will get my top 10 books from 2024. I have, at the point of us recording this in November, I've read like 153 books for the year. So it'll probably be in the 160 range. I'm breaking that down into my top, I'm going to say 10. It's not going to be 10. It'll be 10-ish
Yeah.
of books. What's the problem? Who wants to read it, etc. That being said, great segue, because have you ever read 168 Hours by Laura Vanderkam?
No, I haven't.
Okay, you need to.
Okay.
I've read it twice in a day both times. Like, cannot put it down. Talks about exactly what you're talking about. So it's basically like Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell plus Atomic Habits plus Fair Play by Eve Rodsky. And so she talks
Yeah.
about, like, especially for women, how often a split shift. And I mean, I think you and I spent more time, helping raise our kids than most people are able to. And so that's something that, like, she really breaks down into the book, having these, working from 9 to 2 to drop them off and pick them up, and then coming back at 7 to work a couple hours, and like breaking those things down into 168 hours being the hours you have in a week.
Yeah.
And so I love that. What are you seeing? I have come across a lot of research that talks about knowledge workers basically maxing out at 6 hours a day. I don't know if you have come across similar or seen different or whatnot.
Yeah, I have. I I think it depends on the person and it depends on the day, but um, and I think more in weeks, but I do think that 30 hours a week is kind of tops. Like, and so like if you're well planned out for the day, I think you could do longer than 6 in one day, but um, generally speaking, I think, yeah, you kind of get tapped out. And so I try to build my calendars around a 30-hour work week, knowing full well other stuff may come up, but that gives me a little bit of buffer. But anything much more than that, and I do see a decrease in productivity for each hour you work after that.
Yeah. And so I wish I could say I did this intentionally, but in essence, for the most part, like 9 to 12, and then I'll do like a 2 hour networking lunch. Not that the lunch is 2 hours, but driving
Yeah.
to and from and whatnot. And so
Yeah.
then like 12 to 5, which ends up being really like 6 hours of quote unquote work in 2 3 hour
Mhm.
blocks. Um, and so it's weird to me to like have backdoored into this and then see the research back
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I find a lot of people actually struggle to go longer than 90 minutes. Um, that's not me. Like I can sit down and if I'm into something, I'll like, I don't know if it's ADD or what, but I can like hyper focus on something for 6, 8 hours. But and I don't have like a specific research on this, but I have noticed a lot of people need like right around 90 minutes, they need a break. And so like the attorney that works for me, that's what we do with him is we plan him out for 90 minutes. Then we like intentionally force him to not work for 15 to 30 minutes where he gets up and does ESPN and eats something. And that seems to be a lot more productive for him. So I would, if you're like listening to this and trying to decide what makes sense for you, I would start testing that and looking for it and seeing what makes
Yeah.
sense for you because we're all different and times of day too. Some people like right after lunch, you're just sluggish as all get out and other people are fired up, ready to go. So kind of pay attention to those energy levels and put the right activities when it makes sense for you.
So Dan Pink has this in the book When 75% of people are more focused in the morning and more creative in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And so all of our office meetings, all of our KPI reviews, all of that stuff is the morning. All of our, marketing overview, all of our creative conversations, almost all of my coaching is the afternoons. And I have felt that to be right to me as well. I mean, I'm like, we're Tim Ferrissing it, right? We are the anecdotal evidence of one, but
Yeah.
it seems to work supported by the research behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to a book. It was one of Grant Cardone's books, and he talked about like getting up, working out, and putting on a business book while you're working out. Um, and I love doing that, but I have to plan time after that to implement what I've learned because like if I input all of that information and then don't have a way of like the so what behind it, then I go crazy the rest of the day. So I've had to realize like for me, I love doing it, but I then have to build in a buffer time of implementing what I learn or I lose all productivity for the day.
I love that. And then that's like, I mean, not to rag on conferences, and it's really not even the conference's fault,
Yeah.
not to rag on us traveling to conferences, right? You go to a 3 day conference, you come back with so many ideas, and then you
Yeah.
feel like you're behind on work. So you go right back into work instead of like planning a fourth day off to do the implementation of all the great things. And then you
Yeah.
get mad at the conference for giving you so many great ideas you didn't plan.
You know, I did a conference a little while ago and we had Dan Martell, author of Buy Back Your Time, come speak at it. Um, and one of the members of the conference asked him, like, okay, like, how do you implement all the things you learn when you go to these things? And his answer was, I don't, which blew me away. I was like, what do you mean you don't? Like, you spend all this money. But he then stepped in and said, okay, like, we create plans and we execute the plan. And then we look at the results and we make new decisions for the next plan. He's like, so when I'm learning during that planning session, I don't automatically implement it. He's like, we then put it into place and we start using that information to review against our plan, but we don't implement until the plan's over and the next planning cycle starts, so that his team doesn't get whiplash. One of his employees actually asked him when he was early on in his practice, like, what book are you reading right now? And he's like, why do you care? And he's like, because I don't, he's like, we want to get ahead of the changes you're going to try to make when the book's over. And so that was kind of an opener for him. Like, oh, like I can't be like constantly changing. Like we create plans, we execute plans, and then we use the information we learn to modify the next plan and move forward with it. So yeah, it was good for me. I mean, I whiplash my team all the time. So I didn't love the advice initially, but it has been helpful for me to obviously big things you use through the plan, little things you can implement as you read them, but
Yeah.
make
Well,
sure
so,
they
and
fit into the plan.
that's my point. And like, so I'm like, look, I love books for the foundations,
Yes.
right? I love EOS. I'm going through scaling up now. I love Buy Back Your Time. Like
Yeah.
let me read a book and get like an entire framework.
Yeah.
And then on the specifics, I like TikTok, Instagram reels, TikTok videos, whatever. So like if you
Yeah.
have, I'm going to work out for an hour a day in the morning, listening to my business book with a half an hour block to implement afterwards.
Yeah.
Great. Like I've got that set. And then I might be like, oh, kettlebell swings are the greatest thing since, God's earth. Let me punch that into like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay, this is great. Like, let me do
Yeah.
that here. And so I think it's just a question of figuring out what is the foundation and what is the tactic. I don't know if
Yeah.
I think that sounds right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I call them principles and tactics, but the exact same thing,
There we
right?
go.
What's the principle, what's the tactic, and how can you test them? Like we do a weekly plan in the office, and we decided we were going to do this and we are going to stick to it for 12 weeks. We have tweaked what we plan each week, as we've realized, like, we really don't need to talk about that. We need to spend more time talking about this. So we didn't change planning, and we didn't change how long we're going to plan and those types of things, but we have changed the tactics inside. And I had a little checklist. I was doing that just before we got on this call, so it's literally sitting on this screen right
There
here.
we go.
So yeah, that's a really great point that you made there, Jordan, of like, it's okay to tweak the tactics, but stick with the principle, stick with the plan.
So are you building in, like, obviously you're building in time to make these tweaks, and then you're building in time at the end of the cycle of this whole plan to edit I called it foundation. You called it principles.
Principle. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, I do. I like 12-week planning sessions. There's the book, The 12-Week Year. I'm not the creator of that. I stole it directly from him. And I found it to be helpful for me. After 12 weeks, I actually take a whole week off of working in the business, and we spend that week creating the next plan, tweaking the principles or the foundations, and developing what the plan's going to be for the next 12 weeks. So I take off a full week to do that each time.
See, my issue with that is, I mean, coming from EOS, you do like the quarterly
Yeah.
rocks, and they're just
Yeah.
like, we're going to call it a 12-week year instead of a quarterly rock. And I was like, look, I don't know who's there first, but I think we can
Yeah.
all agree the year nicely breaks down into 4 13-week increments, and we have
It
these
does.
things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's probably correct because so many people do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I, I do think 12 weeks is great. I also think if you build like small chunks of time built around other things, like I used to plan between my vacations. So like if I was going on a vacation, I would just do the plan before the vacation. That worked pretty good too. The problem was, is I didn't want to think about making and updating my plan while I was on vacation. And
Right.
so I didn't feel like I implemented and made changes as effectively as I could have. And so I just, if there's a vacation, there's a vacation, and the team will figure it out. But yeah, the idea of having shorter goal periods, I think is helpful nonetheless.
Well, and from the standpoint of boundaries, there is a huge difference between the boundary of a vacation and the boundary of working offsite.
Yeah.
And we merge those things together too often and then
Yeah.
wonder why we are not refreshed from vacation when we didn't take a vacation. We just worked from somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point.
So so we've got these boundaries set, right? So we're going to have boundaries for our work week, 30 hours. We're going to have boundaries every 13 weeks for the planning. We're going to have boundaries for vacation stuff. Are you are we filling these things in top down or bottom up? Because I know that you said like you're putting the important things in first, but I don't know if that's like the important things on a day to day and then build into a week and build into a month, or if that's the important things overall. Like, walk me through a little bit more of that next step of boundifying our lives. We're making that a word.
Yep, that's a word. I like it. Um, yeah, I put in what I call energy adding activities first. So for me, that's spending time with my family, taking care of kids. I mean, don't get me wrong, kids are also energy
I
sucking
was gonna say,
activities,
I was
but
like, teach me your secrets in that
important.
respect.
Yeah. But those types of things I put in first. Then as I'm doing like the income producing activities, I like to take my 12-week goals and I break them down into a 1 week chunk. Like, if I'm going to make the math easy, 120,000 in 12 weeks, then that's $10,000 each week. And so that means if you're working 5 days, that's $2,000 each day. And I would figure out the activities for that time. And so bottom up, top down, yes, I think is the answer there. But
Okay.
I do like to see like, how is the action that I'm taking right now? How does that fit into the bigger picture? Because if I don't, if I'm tired and I don't want to work and I have on my calendar to go draft this motion, it's helpful for me to see like, if I don't draft this motion now and I watch YouTube instead, um, what does that mean? I either don't make the money or I have to give up something else on my calendar to do that motion later. Like, for me, it really helps to see like, if I don't do the thing that I planned on doing right now, how does that affect the rest of my life? And more often than not, for me, as I'm looking at it, what ends up getting affected is the time with my family and those personal activities. And once I realized that, I'm like, okay, well, that's not worth it. Like, I don't want to show up late and make my wife have to cook dinner by herself with 3 kids yelling at her, because then no one's happy the rest of the night because she's overstimulated and we're all tired. And so it kind of gives me the motivation to do the thing now so that the rest of the plan carries out.
I That was awesome, man. And I like this just the way that you are framing the balance. It sounds so simple, and it should be, but like it makes it easier for people to make the decision on those things.
Yeah.
So I wanna flip this a little bit, right? So I'm gonna throw some stuff at you from like my position on booking a day.
Yeah.
Push back anywhere, agree with me anywhere, whatever. Like, I am so curious to see, as much as we are aligned, where this would be different.
Okay.
So I'm on this kick. Modern medicine is basically like 75 years old. We are going to find out over the next 20 or 30 years how many things are that we do currently are as stupid as we think leeches and bloodletting was back before modern medicine.
Yes.
I think the biggest one right now is sleep. I think we are finding that. So I think the research right now is 9 hours of opportunity for sleep, which ends up being close to 8 hours, which ends up being, 2 REM cycles, like the whole rundown from there.
Yeah.
So that for me would be my first thing is I would find my 9 hours. So for me, it's basically 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. For the most part, I'll end up like falling asleep between 9 and 9:30, and then I'll wake up usually about 5:30 before an alarm, just because that tends to be like a natural cycle for me.
Yeah.
That's what I would start with my non-negotiable. Like, I want my sleep at least 6 days a week. Then I think we talked about exercise a bunch. I think an hour of exercise, like that's how you stay in the game. If you
Yeah.
are miserable and in pain, you're not showing up for anything. So whatever time it is, I don't care. But like an hour of exercise and then to and from, depending upon what it is. Then for me, like I take my kid to school and pick him up on certain days. So I've got those booked into my weeks, like how long it takes. I get him ready in the morning. That starts at 7. So if I'm up at 6, I've got my hour of exercise. I've got him at 7, building out from there. And then if I'm picking him up, he can be picked up anytime between 3 and 6. So normally I'll pick him up on Wednesdays. We go out early. Otherwise, I've got flexibility in my schedule, and it's like 5 minutes from the office on the way back to the house to
Yeah.
get him. Am I on the path so far?
Yeah. 100%. I believe in a good chunk of sleep. For me, 7.5 hours of sleeping is the perfect number. I've tried more, I've tried less, my body just thrives on that 7.5. I don't know if there's a reason for that or not, but and so I give myself enough time to go to sleep, and then 7.5 hours later I wake up. I try to wake up at 5:30 each day, work out for an hour or so,
And then
and then
implement it.
implement it. Yeah.
I dig
I
it.
usually, after I've worked out and stuff, that's when my kids start waking up. And so I'm the same way. I have to take that break to help with the kids and get them off to school. And then the first little bit of time at the office is implementing, and I roll from there. So very similar thought process.
So then here's where I want to bring back in what you said for specifics. So then you mentioned like you want bringing those things in your life that give you energy.
Yeah.
At the point that I've got, 9 hours of sleep and an hour of getting him ready and an hour of working out and the travel stuff. So let's say that leaves me with, let's call that 12 hours, do an hour of exercise, travel, an hour. So I've got half my day.
Yeah.
How are you determining how much of those other 12 hours become the fun stuff, become the work stuff, become the intersection where we do those things? Like, walk me through that in a little bit more detail, because I know you've touched on this, but like this is
Yeah.
huge.
Um, I and I don't think you necessarily have to have an exact equal distribution of time on these time, money, and energy things. Um, I have used Parkinson's law to try and limit my income producing activities to 30 hours a week or less.
Yeah.
And so so the first thing I would do is identify those fun activities with my family. Like some of them are reoccurring things. Some of them are church obligations. So those go there first. Then I put the 30 hours in for the income producing activities next. And then some of it is I mean, for energy specifically, like I know that's like I don't know, some people think that's a weird word, and maybe there's a better word for it, but I kind of like to pause and reflect for myself and see like kind of where am I at? What am I motivated and excited for right now? Because I go through cycles. Like there are times in which I'm really, really excited to build and grow a business. And if that's the case, doing those activities are energy adding for me, where if I've done that for more than, a month or two, then I start to get a little burned out and I need time away. And so,
Interesting.
yeah. And so I kind of try to pay attention to that. Like I'm kind of in a, a weird one right now. I hit all of my financial goals for the year at the beginning of the month. And
Congratulations.
then I'm like, so what do I do with the next 2 months of my life? Right. Like I'm here at work. And I'm like, why am I here? Like I already made the money. Like I'm unbalanced. And I had to, my first initial thought was, well, I'll just set a bigger financial goal. But then I was like, wait, like I made that financial goal because of these other things. Like, what have I given up? And so, I mean, I still come to work 3 days a week right now, but um, I've I had to stop the idea of chasing the money just because I can, and it's 8 to 5, and start asking myself some of these other things. Some of the fitness goals that I had, I was a little behind on because I had an injury. Um, and I volunteered a bunch at my kids' school because inevitably, I feel like family is one of the first things that gets the short end of the stick
Yeah,
when
but
you're
it's
doing
the most
stuff,
important
right?
thing.
Yeah. And so, and like I wouldn't trade that for the world. We did a vision screening the other day. So all the kids came and got their eyes tested. And I went and volunteered there and literally just like directed the kids into the line. And it was so fun.
All
Like
right, who can't see my shirt? You
yeah,
guys
this
go
was
to
the shirt I
you
was
guys are
wearing.
blind. Go to
And they
that
were all
line.
excited. They're like, go find the redhead with the orange shirt, right? And I'm like waving my hands and directing kids. And both my kids are in the elementary school there. So they're seeing me and having a fun time. And I mean, that was like 2-3 hours of my day. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. Like there's no amount of money that I would have wanted to make that in lieu of doing that. And so I do just kind of pause and reflect. Like, am I excited about this stuff now? Why or why not? How does that fit into the bigger picture? And kind of pivot from there. So there are times where I will work 60 hours a week on the business because I'm excited and I'm growing and that's okay. Um, if I do that though, it's usually because in 2 or 3 weeks I'm going to Disneyland with my family. And so I'm excited to do this now, knowing full well I've got the quality time with my family later, and I'm just kind of looking at it there. So there's not like a hard and fast rule there. I usually put the activities with my family first, the 30 hours to work on the income next, and then I kind of plan the rest of the week around it. and then kind of just gauge my energy levels on and excitements for different things.
Well, but I think that is the rule.
Yeah.
I mean, and look, it is the longer time horizon you can exist on is a luxury. It's also, I think, a fast track to success.
Yeah.
So for you to take my question and take it into a longer time horizon, congratulations. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um, but and not but and the opportunity for people listening to this to do the same is, I think, where they're going to find success. If you
Yeah.
don't have to force yourself to do this, okay, I've got 12 hours left, 6 and 6, 6 for work, 6 for everything else. If you can take that into planning for a couple weeks, into making sure you finish this 12-week year strong, into making sure you enjoy, push now to do the vacation in another couple weeks, I think that is better.
Yeah. And recognizing those cycles and energy is also important. I think where I ended up being so successful financially was I recognized that in myself. And so I try whenever I'm excited to work, I try to work on things that will last when I'm not excited. It's like building systems or training a team or something. And
Mm-hmm.
you'd see that in my growth. Like I'd get really excited and we'd grow a ton. And then I'd get burned out. But my systems and my teams would maintain where we were at. And I may be way down here, like playing video games 8 hours a day, but the business didn't crash because I had the systems and people in place. So then when I got excited, we got to pick up from there and grow again. And you kind of see that like step basis. So instead of it kind of being
Yeah.
cyclical, right? We stepped with the excitement. So spending that time on systems and people, I think was the best thing for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of people talk about plateauing as a bad thing, but if you are plateauing, if your business is plateauing because you are personally cratering,
Yes.
that's great. Like that is awesome. You've prevented yourself from falling down that much more, and then building back up to the next step.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. All right, so let me talk about our next guest, and then we'll come back for our wrap ups.
Yeah.
Next week is going to be another cool episode. I don't know that my guest will be as much fun or wear a matching shirt because we've got Chelsea Williams on next week. For those who don't know, Chelsea is the founder of Core Solutions Group, Money Mastery, and the Always and Never About Money podcast. So we're talking all things money. I go back to like my favorite story being Joseph Heller and Kurt Vonnegut at some party talking about Vonnegut asked Heller, hey, what do you feel about this guy's party we're at making more money than all of us in like one day? And Heller saying, well, but at least we know what enough is. And so I'm really excited to talk to Chelsea Williams and really every financial person. Like, how do we figure out what is enough so that
Yes.
we can set the revenue target so that we can hit it in 10 months so that we can, have fun the last 2 months, do enough to keep things going, figure out where things are rather than this weird concept of more, more, more. So that'll be a great chat. Next week, we'll have that one. So Chris, coming back, what do we miss? We're talking boundaries here. We've got the boundaries for sleep. We've got the boundaries for work. We've got looking at a longer timeline. Are we missing anything major in this conversation of setting boundaries to have a great life?
I don't know if we've missed anything, but I do just want to reiterate that importance of being intentional with it. Because time ticks away whether you're paying attention or not. And so the important thing here is just being incredibly intentional with the actions that you're taking. Like and identifying your triggers. Like I know very well, like if I start playing video games at work, that's a symptom of something else. And I want to figure out what that is and fix it. If you're doing that, that's where I see the increase in happiness. That doesn't mean you have to make more money. I'm not saying any of those things. I'm just saying like pay attention to those triggers, pay attention to what you're doing, constantly be testing. That's where you're going to get the most happiness. It's not just from following everybody else's tracks. Don't follow my
Yeah.
tracks. Don't follow Jordan's. Follow what makes the most sense for you, but test it. Be
But
intentional.
follow our principles to figure
Yeah.
out your own tactics. I think
Yeah.
that's the, yeah.
100%.
Well,
Yeah.
and so, I love the way that you phrased that before because like it's not like you're not going to necessarily play video games for a money reason. You're not necessarily going to play video games for a time reason. You're not necessarily going to play video games for an energy reason. It could be any of those things.
Yeah.
And so like just trying to think through it, it may be a training issue. It may be a pricing issue. It may be, I don't know, whatever else.
Yeah.
All right, here's where I want to leave us. Brene Brown has a quote about boundaries. It says, boundaries are the point at which you can love yourself and the other person.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to us setting boundaries for a great life, I think it's really great to figure out what is the boundary where I can love myself and my clients, where I can love well, I guess I love my child no matter what, where I can like my child. What are the
Yeah.
boundaries for that? What are the boundaries where I can love my employees and myself? What are the boundaries for all these things? And then setting them in a way where you can achieve them, whether that's internal to yourself, whether that's financial, whether that's health, whether it's whatever. I think this is great, man.
Yeah. I love that quote and I love that statement. And that's a great way to end it. So thank you. That's great.
Well, no, we're not going to end it there.
Yeah.
We're going to end me there because here's the thing. For anybody who's been smart enough to listen to this for the last 50 something minutes and wants more of you, what's the best way for them to get in touch so that they can hear awesome life advice from two guys wearing Hawaiian shirts?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to find me is timefreedomlawyers.com. All of the different resources and stuff, YouTube channels, those types of things, they're all linked to and accessed there. So that's where I would suggest. I probably spend most of my time on Facebook interacting with people there. I think scalingforlawyers.com, I think, is the URL that will take you to the Facebook group. But the link to the Facebook group will be on that timefreedomlawyers.com as well. So head there and you can find me.
Awesome, man. And along those lines, for somebody who's been listening this entire time, remembers nothing that we said, wants the biggest takeaway, the most important thing, the super nugget of wisdom, the holy grail of a wonderful life, what do you have for them?
I'm going to say you deserve it. A lot of people
Ooh.
think that they don't deserve the happiness for one reason or another, and you absolutely do. And so cut your own path, decide what happiness is for you, and then make it happen.
Love it, man. All right. So with that, thank you so much to everybody who watched and listened to this. We hope to see you back here next week, January 28th at 6 p.m. Eastern time for Chelsea Williams' talk about what is enough from a financial standpoint. Check out Chris's stuff, go to the website, hang out, and ultimately set the boundaries in your own life to help you live a great life. Thank you to everybody for being here. Chris, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
See you all back next week.